So, back in February of 1956, planes were, the propeller type. My parents lived in a valley amongst many mountains, and in those days, it was in West Virginia, they would cut off the top of a mountain, pave it, and call it an airport. They did not de-ice planes in the winter like they do now. They did not clear the runways of snow or anything like that. So my dad was in furniture manufacturing, and so he went to the furniture shows, and it was in Chicago in those days. This was my mother's very first trip on an airplane, and she was pregnant with me. I was her fourth pregnancy. She lost the third one. And she looked, even though she was only around 4 months pregnant, when I look at the pictures, she looks like she's 7 or 8 months pregnant. She's big. I mean, yeah, you get bigger faster with subsequent children, but she was bigger than I would have expected her to be anyway. And especially at 4 months, because you usually barely show at 4 months, most people. But she was big. So they went to Chicago. They're flying back. She looks out the window and she goes, "Oh my gosh, there's a whole lot of snow there." And the next thing they know, the pilot, as it turned out, overshot the runway. The wheels didn't take hold. They went off the side of the mountain. Now, about 100 yards down, there was a ledge, and the plane had slowed down enough that the nose of the plane stopped on the ledge. So, plane's vertical. Everybody's hanging from their seatbelt because they are, in essence, vertical as well. And in those days, they didn't know that women needed to put the seatbelt under the belly. So the seatbelt, I believe, from what she said when I talked to her about it later, was across her belly. I never really thought much about that, quite frankly, because I wasn't born yet. She clipped all the newspaper articles and all of that for me. And there's some small world stories related to that, but not related to this podcast, so I won't go there. But I never really thought about it other than it was interesting. When I was in my 40s, I studied with a group that at that time was called Rebirthing with Sandra Ray and other people in her organization that taught. Rebirthing is a breathing technique that only adults are supposed to use because kids are doing their own thing, right? They have their own growth process. We don't do this with kids. It is an opportunity. It is a different kind of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's using the breath and affirmations to shift negative thinking into positive or at least neutral thinking. So it's a personal growth type thing. I had what's called a spontaneous rebirth. I started studying to be a rebirther, and I was in Ojo Caliente in New Mexico because we were doing water rebirths there. And I went into an altered state. So I was with a partner in a sailing pool, natural sailing pool is the closest chemical mineral combination as it is in utero when they're in the amniotic fluid. So it's very close to that environment. Not exact, but close. And so I'm, just doing the dead man hang in the water with my little snorkel and my nose clip. And my partner was, because I didn't like being touched when I went through these, so he just had his hand on my belly button to keep me stable and at the top of the water. And all of a sudden, I see a finger break off of my twin. So we're facing each other. And I see her finger break off and float away in the amniotic fluid. Now I'm going to stop here for a minute because I have had numerous people say that's not possible. Well, the truth of the matter is none of us know what can happen inside the uterus. we don't know what we can see or what we can't see, but it's energetic. Information is energetic. And we know, especially twins, communicate with each other all the time in utero, right? They interact with each other. So even though it was 4 months and I was only maybe, that big, and my twin was maybe that big, and light does filter in through the skin, who knows? This is just how I remembered it, which is using the mind of a 40-something-year-old and pulling visuals in to make sense of the experience. I don't know if it really happened, literally happened, or if it was information describing in ways I could understand what happened. So I don't want people listening to this to get all bent out of shape over the details, because communication is energetic, not physiological, literal communication, although we attempt to communicate through those means. That's why we have so many misunderstandings, is because the words don't necessarily convey the energy of the discussion, of the talk, whatever. So going back, I freaked out. I went into that fetal position, when people get stressed out, they sometimes go into in the physical body. I kind of locked into that, and I noticed because the adult me was observing. It's like I wasn't part of this. It was a flashback. So the adult me is observing, but I had no control over my body. Believe me, I tried. I tried to control it, but it's like I was not part of the body anymore. So I'm like this, but I had, grabbed my nose clip thing and was holding on to that. Now, it was on my nose. It did not go across my throat. But I felt like I had something against my throat. So, being logical, I wonder if I had, when I went into that position, grabbed my umbilical cord and held it up next to my throat. Because the interesting thing is, as you can see, I can't, and even wearing a necklace, and this is bothering me a little, so today's not the day to wear the necklace, but I cannot stand anything around my neck. I sometimes have tolerance, but I very rarely, like you're wearing a t-shirt, I have to cut out the t-shirt part. Or what I do is I get a t-shirt that's 4 sizes bigger, so it kind of hangs down. And it's like a dress, so it's nice, right? But so I followed my twin up this beam of light. Beautiful music, absolutely beautiful music. And to me, they sounded like bhajans, which are religious chants, from India. And I had no connection with India at that time in terms of religious practice. I don't now. I respect it. And I do love some of the bhajans I've learned. But I had no exposure. So it's like, where did that come from? Certainly had no exposure as a child. And it's like there was a huge path, like the width of 2 lanes on a highway. And it was kind of shiny golden. I'm remembering this now. But what took my attention was this very large oval white radiant light being, kind of sort of shadowy humanoid in the center, but mostly it was this beautiful radiant light. And seemed like a masculine energy versus feminine or neutral. And he came up to me and said, "You can't go any further." And my twin had already gone on. And I'm like, "No, I'm supposed to stay with my twin. I like it here. I like it here. I'm going to stay." And he's like, "No, you can't stay." I'm like, "But I like it here." And we argued, at least my interpretation of argument. I basically was stubborn. It's like, I don't want to go. I want to stay here. It also felt like pure, unconditional love, like the essence, like the air we breathe but it's pure unconditional love, which feels great, by the way. And finally he goes, and I swear it feels like he sighed like that. I don't know that he did, but that's my interpretation of the experience. And he goes, your mother asked for you. And I just kind of like everything dropped. I'm like, oh, okay then. And I was sent back to the body. Now, I talked with my mom about all this, about not my experience, because she was older. But I talked to her about, and I had over the years and had little bits and pieces of information. And basically what she said is they were very, very afraid she was going to lose the baby. You know, in 1956, they didn't have ways to determine what the sex of the baby was, if you were having one or two. It's like when you gave birth, you'd find out all of those things, because they didn't have ultrasound. Certainly not like what they have today with the 3D ultrasound, which is very cool. So she didn't know anything other than she was pregnant and that she hoped it would be a girl because she already had 2 boys. And she said they were very concerned about her because she started bleeding. But obviously that got handled, and here I am. So there's no way to prove or disprove whether I was a twin. No way to prove. That's why I say it's an alleged NDE. Yes, I experienced a cellular level flashback, which, based on what my understanding of those, I would not have experienced it if it hadn't happened, because everything that happens to us is in the cellular level. So can't prove it, but the little pieces we can prove kind of lean towards, yeah, something happened. So how did that change me? The only thing I can go by was the first 6 years of my life. The second NDE was when I was 6. And an attitude I had, I made a vow when the NDE, and that was definitely an NDE. Although, again, not validated by doctors. But I was out of my body and I went up into the light again. To give you an idea, my mother said she would just sit and watch me, wondering about me because nobody could be that good. Right. Then I was in preschool and nursery school, you know, all the twice a week, whatever, so that you're exposed to learning at a young age. And I think it was 3-year-old nursery school when I was done with the class. And I actually saw the letter, but I think it's been thrown away since my parents died. The teacher sent home a letter expressing how sorry she was to see me go, because I was the one who always made sure all of the other children were included and was very compassionate when one of the children was sad and would go take care of them, basically. So I think there are some children like that. So I don't know if that was from the NDE and that being exposed to that pure love. There's no way of knowing if there's a correlation. But that's how I behaved, was caring about others. I also, according to my mother, had a wisdom that my siblings never expressed. They may have had it, but they didn't express it, whereas I'd express it. So
I was wondering, was it maybe that the first NDE or the experience that you had, was it maybe just reminding you of your purpose? Because when I hear that you were, that child that just wants to take care of everybody and make sure that everybody is loved and taken care of, it sounds like that's a higher purpose, right? That then played out through your life.
Throughout my life, I have been told by complete strangers who do this working, like I met an amazing artist, and what she does is angel pictures. I could get mine and show it to you if you like. It's not that important. I mean, it's a beautiful picture, but it's not important to this. And she said to me when she gave me the painting, And yeah, I paid for it. But when she presented the complete finished painting to me, she said, usually I just explain what the different elements mean. But my guide said with you that I'm to tell you, you are here for a purpose. And some of these elements are related to giving you information related to your purpose on this planet. So that kind of leads me in a way, perfect segue, into the second NDE, which I believe was literally on my 6th birthday, or it was definitely around it because we were going on a short drive, about an hour or so. I don't know exactly how far, maybe 2 hours. We had a young woman living with us who was going to college, and she was on scholarship, but part of that, at least my understanding, I was very young, so I might have it wrong. But I believe part of that was she needed to find a host family to stay with. And my parents were hosting her, and she would help around the house and babysit, and she basically became a family member. The family was friends with her until she died. But anyway, she was taking me to her and my younger brother, who was 2.5, to see her parents up in the mountains. And I absolutely adored her dad. He did magic tricks, like taking quarters out of my ear. And to a 6-year-old, that's like amazing stuff, right? At least in those days. Maybe they're more savvy today, I don't know. But anyway, we're on the trip, and to keep us on the drive, my grandfather insisted she drive his car, which was brand new, and it had power steering. And it's the first time she'd ever driven a car with power steering. And she'd grown up on a farm with a tractor, and you got to like turn it 12 times just to get going towards the left kind of thing. So power steering was a lot more sensitive. To keep us, I was in the back seat. My brother was standing up in the front seat. They did not have car seats in those days. They did not have seat belts installed on a regular basis. They were almost transitioning to that, but it hadn't happened yet. So I'm sitting in the back, and I'm sliding from side to side of the car to look out the windows, because to keep us busy, she had us looking for cows. I'm a very, very competitive person. At that time, I didn't know how to direct it effectively. I just wanted to, be best at everything. I also have my oldest brother's competitive, so had that reference point. So I'm finding all the cows first, because I'm 6 or about to be 6, and he's 2.5. We're going up the mountain, which are, windy trails, even though it's a road, and a 2-lane road. And all of a sudden, my brother goes, "See cow, see cow." And he does it straight across her eyes. And she jerks the wheel that way, which is a normal response when something like that happens. You tend to, hands go with it because your eyes are going that way, right? And we went down the mountain. Now the windows were open. They were both, the belief from what I was told by my mother years later. Because the windows were open, he's so tiny. Virginia wasn't, she was an adult, but they apparently fell out the windows because both of them were found on the hillside, and neither one of them were injured at all. Couple bruises, that was it. I was in the car all the way down. Now here's my memory. First thing I think of is, wait, how did he see a cow before I did? And then the next thing is, like everything turning, like you see in the movies when they give the person's point of view, it really does look like that, like everything's tumbling all over the place. You can't tell what's up or down. And then the next thing I know, I'm looking up at the bottom of the front driver's seat, like I was underneath the front driver's seat. There was only that much room. I wasn't that tiny. So I wasn't really there. Now, this is my analysis based on my memory when I was older and had studied this stuff. It was not my understanding at that time, I was just confused. Why am I looking at the bottom of the front seat? Then everything goes black, completely black. And I don't remember anything from that time period. The next thing I know, I'm floating above a car and I'm looking at the front seat, and Virginia was in the passenger side, and I was confused. Why is she in the passenger seat? Why isn't she in the driver's seat driving the car? This doesn't make sense. So I looked over to the driver's seat, and there's this man who to me looked ancient, but he was probably only in his 40s. And he's driving, and I'm like, who is that man? Why is he driving? Hey, wait a minute. Whose car is this? And then I see this woman in the back seat holding my body. And I'm crying, and I'm thinking, who is she? Why is she holding me? And why am I crying? Next thing I know, I'm in my body crying. At the hospital, I ended up breaking a leg, and I needed some stitches. So at the hospital, and of course they made the phone calls, and everybody's descending on us. And I just remember sitting there being very, very angry and kind of disconnected. Everyone's trying to make me happy, like you would with a 6-year-old. Can I get your popsicle? Oh, let me do a magic trick, because her parents came down, that stuff. And I'm just very withdrawn and angry. And I made a vow. I am never coming back here because I have to. Only because I want to, and then only to help people. Now, even though I was 6 years old, that vow had to be negated eventually. And that's another story that happened down in Peru, in Machu Picchu area, where it's when I had the cancer, and I was okay with dying because I was exhausted. And I mean, it's a long story. I was doing a lot of caregiving, but not taking care of myself as well as I probably should have. So I got what turned out to be a stage 3 cancer. And here I am, emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausted because of the 5 years prior. And I was okay with dying because, hello, it's nice there. I was okay. I know my kids would have had a problem with it, maybe a few other people, but I was okay with it. And I had a mystical experience where my guides and angels showed me what I had accomplished. I was in my mid-50s. And they basically said, you have completed what you were here to do. It's okay if you want to die. It's okay for you to move on. And then they go, however, and I don't remember what was said after that. But I think it had to do with why I'm back here, because at the end of it I said, okay, I choose to come back, but only to make a positive difference in the world. So here it is, 12 years later, and I'm just starting that process of making a bigger splash. I know one-on-one, because people have told me, one-on-one I have made a positive difference in many people's lives. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity. Because they are people who are going to make a positive difference in other people's lives. And that's how love spreads, is through a grassroots level. Love, respect on this physical level. So,
couldn't agree with you more.
NDEs. I found out later. I talked to Virginia like 30, 40 years later. So I'm an adult. I think I was in my 40s, because in my 30s I had 2 young children who had time. Right? And I asked her, how long, do you remember that? And she's like, oh, yes. And I'm like, well, how long was it before they found me? And she goes, well, they didn't even know you were there. They saw your brother, they saw me, they got us, they rushed him to the hospital, because of course he was a baby, so they sent someone ahead with him to go to the hospital. Because in those days you couldn't call 911 or emergency support. It was neighbors and people driving along who would stop and help you. And they'd taken her, and they were literally starting to drive away when she goes, where's Sara? Who's Sara? There's a little 6-year-old girl that was in the car with us. So they real quick go back and found me. And she said that was between 30 and 45 minutes. So that blackness Had to have lasted close to 30 minutes or longer. Have no idea what was said there. Scared a lot of people, though, apparently. That they couldn't find me right away.
For sure, I can imagine that.
To me, it's just like, oh, it happened, big deal. I was angry. Oh, the other thing, I just remember this. I was told by the folks on the other side, shall we say, I was told not to talk to anybody about what happened and what I remembered. And as an adult and looking back, the only thing that makes sense to me is because if I had, they would have thought I had brain damage or something, and they would have put me into a state institution, which they had in those days. And because they weren't that good, those state institutions, I would have probably been in there the rest of my life.
I think today, yeah, we're much more open, but I do remember talking to somebody who has had an NDE, and then he was taken to the hospital because he survived a car crash that you couldn't possibly survive. So of course he was taken to the hospital to get checked out, but everything was fine. But just because everything was fine, but then he was in that car crash, he was taken to jail afterwards because they couldn't comprehend just letting him be. They thought he needed somebody to be responsible for him. He found himself in jail, and all of a sudden he was a musician. He is a musician, but he found himself giving legal advice to those inmates that he was just receiving, like about their cases. So it was quite scary.
Are you familiar with Edgar Cayce? You ever heard of him?
No.
All right, you might want to look him up, Edgarcayce. He's not alive now. He died in the early 1940s. But and he was born in the late or somewhere in the last quarter of the 1800s. I don't know exactly when. But very, very religious man. I think by the time he was 8, he had read the Bible at least once for every year he was alive. And that was a habit he continued throughout his life, is my understanding. So what happened is he, at some point, I don't remember how old he was, but he got very sick and went into a coma. And there's stuff that happened. The only book that was written while he was alive is called There Is a River by Thomas Sugrue, Sugrue. But what I remember, because I read this when I was like 8 years old, so it's a long ago memory. When he came out of the coma, while he was in the coma, he spoke and told his parents, here's what you need to do to help the boy get better, or however it was said. When he came out, he had this ability to go into trance and diagnose and provide treatment for people who had illnesses that the doctors had given up on. 85%, according to the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is an organization he created, which is in Virginia Beach, but it's around the world, the small groups. He has an 85% success rate on all those. And he had an 8th grade education. So just like your musician, universal knowledge is available to us. So maybe that accident opened up that doorway.
Exactly. So tell me about your experience in Peru. So you were fighting cancer at that point. And then
I literally had just had my surgery. It was uterine cancer. I had a stage 3 cancer, which means all the lymph nodes had cancer in them. And I literally had my surgery 3 weeks before I'd gone to Peru. So here's the power of the mind. I've had several surgeries throughout my life, and if I have any notice, for some reason, when I go through the surgery for about 3 or 4 weeks after, I have problems. Infections, all kinds of problems. The one time that didn't happen is when I went into the ER. They thought I had a heart problem. It wasn't. It was a gallbladder problem. I was in surgery 3 hours later. I had no time to think about it. Had no problems afterwards. But the cancer, and that was laparoscopic, which might have had something to do with it. Cancer, they had to cut me from belly to bone because the tumors were so big. In Peru, I was with a small group doing this spiritual journey, and I had paid for the trip ahead of time in full, and it was non-refundable. I also had paid for it for my youngest, my son, who had just graduated from high school, which was a good thing, it turns out, because it was paid for long before I knew I had cancer. On Thursday, we were supposed to fly out on Saturday. This is about the power of the mind. On Thursday, I'm taken into the hospital with a high fever. It turned out I had an infection. They didn't know from what. They didn't know what kind of infection is. They checked me into the hospital. Friday morning, it's a teaching hospital, so the oncologist comes in with all the students, right? And he's teaching them, but I'm like advocating for myself. So I'm like, okay, so when will I be released? Because I got to leave Sunday. And he looks at me like I'm crazy. And he goes, you're going to be here at least till Tuesday. And I'm like, nope, going to Peru on Sunday. I had 103, 104 fever, by the way. It's like, I'm going to Peru. They're non-refundable tickets. I'm going to Peru. And he's like, no, you are not. And we're arguing. And then finally I got smart. And I asked him, what would it take for you to release me by Sunday morning? This was Friday morning. And he said, you don't have a fever by tomorrow morning. Which I'm sure he's thinking, she's got 103, 104 fever. We don't know what kind of infection she has. We're just bombarding her with antibiotics. And I'm allergic to the penicillin series, so not all the antibiotics. But we don't even know. We won't know till Monday or Tuesday. She's not leaving. There's no way she can do this. The next morning, my temperature was down to 99. Because I was determined to go on that trip. So they sent me with, I had to give myself shots and stuff like that and stay on antibiotics. He wasn't happy, but I had achieved what he said I had to achieve. Power of the mind. That's why, little tangent here, I am a social worker. People are going to watch this. Hopefully they will grow and learn. That's why it's important to pay attention to your language. Because at the very least, your language is going to influence what you pay attention to. And that's going to influence your life experiences. So like you used the word, you try to, I forget what it was related to, but you said, I try to do something. Try is a non-word. I mean, we think it's a word. But think about it. When you try, and if you look this up, what does try mean? It means put a whole lot of effort into something, but you don't accomplish. Doing accomplishes. It might take a while, but it accomplishes. Not doing accomplishes something. But trying accomplishes nothing. You just expend a whole lot of energy. So I encourage people, get that out of your vocabulary. Get that out of your vocabulary. Because, and that's a gift that the NDEs gave me too when I was young, is I literally saw, I don't now, but when I was younger, I could literally see the energy. Well, let me rephrase that. I still see energies because that's what I do when I work with people through the coaching part of my life. But I see it differently now. It's more like internal as opposed to literally seeing it around people. The energy of the words they used. Like, if you're in, because I was in middle school, if you're in choir and the teacher says, all right, for choir, all the girls have to have black skirts and all the boys have to have black pants. That seems like a pretty complete instruction, right? However, I guarantee you, if you have 20 girls, you'll have at least 15 different skirts with different shades of black. Same with the boys. You're going to have different shades of black and different styles of pants. So the only thing that's common is it's in the spectrum of black color, right? Words mean different things to different people. Again, that's part of why we sometimes have communication problems. Because you're being, like the two of us, I'm very clear with what I mean by what I'm saying, but other people understand my words differently. I guarantee you, people watching this podcast will understand it differently. So words are powerful. Pay attention to what you use for yourself, as well as be kind to others. Let's see. So that Peru, yeah, I think that covers. I mean, I could go into details, but I don't think it matters. I just have this mystical experience that I chose to come back.
And I also wanted to talk about the book that you wrote, because I have a feeling that the purpose for which you decided to come back has something to do with the book that you just published.
So you're right.
So tell me a bit more about what you've been working on.
So I actually dreamed this, at the time I dreamed it, I perceived it as a trilogy, 3 books. 3 separate storylines, but one overall picture of what the books, what the overall storyline, but 3 different protagonists, I guess is the way to say it. I literally dreamed the entire trilogy when I was pregnant with my daughter, who, as I said earlier with you, is 35 now. Life was very challenging for a lot of different reasons in a lot of different areas. So I really didn't get to start on the book until maybe a little over 20 years ago. And I didn't really get to work on it much because within a year of working through, and I'd gotten about 30,000 words written, I think. Maybe it was 60,000, somewhere in there. I know that's a huge gap, but I don't remember if it was 30 or 60, but it wasn't finished. That's the bottom line. And when I went to take care of both my parents and my children from afar, one was in college, one moved in with his dad, but they still needed me as a fixer. So 700 miles away, I was still handling things, as well as taking care of both of my parents. It turns out my mother had 3 kinds of dementia. They were both in the brain donation program. Dad was fine. He had just, getting older, memory loss. But she had 3 different kinds of dementia. So we'll just say the situation was challenging. High stress. And within a few months of them moving into supported living, after 3 years of my being there with them, I didn't have the ability to take care of all their needs. So they decided they wanted to go, and they didn't need to be doing stairs anymore. So they decided it was time to move into a supported living environment. Within a year, might have been less. I'd have to count it out. Doesn't matter. It might have been within months. It might have been within a year. But I think it was about a year later, after moving back to where my kids were living, my son was in a car accident and broke his neck. He was a senior in high school. He's fine now, by the way, for those who are going, right? He's worked hard to be fine. And a few months after that, I was diagnosed with the cancer. So, kind of didn't have time to work on the book at all. And then when I was done with the chemo at the age of 57, I'm like, what do I do now? And that little voice goes, get a degree in social work. And I'm like, really? So I talked to my friends and they're like, Sara, might as well get paid for what you do already. Wasn't totally accurate. Social work, getting that degree helped fine-tune a lot of my skill set. But anybody who's listening, you stop learning when you decide to stop learning. I know people who went back to school in their 80s. Maybe it was a fine arts degree or a music degree. But you stop and you start physically dying and mentally dying as soon as you stop. So if you're still breathing, find something that interests you and really delve into it and bring joy to your life. Because that's what life is about, bottom line, is the joy. Loving yourself, loving others. I don't mean loving them personally. One of the things I have no doubt of is it's all about unconditional love, which I define as loving a person, accepting a person where they are. Doesn't mean you got to hang out, because maybe you don't like to be around people where that person is, but you accept that's where they are. And it's interesting, I'm told the best social workers, the most effective social workers or therapists, because there's other ways to be a therapist, are the ones who accept their clients right where they are and work with them where they are. It's a loving thing to do. But that's how I define unconditional love. You don't have to participate. You don't even have to be in the same town, but you do accept people where you are. And that's sometimes hard when you have politicians who are in the business for themselves, not for anyone else, and they're hurting people by their choices. We talked about that earlier, right? But that's where they are. And it's acceptance without judgment. Because we don't see the big picture. We only see our small piece of it. It's okay to be angry. That's information. Oh, that's another thing I want to share that's not about this. But I think it is something I learned from all my spiritual experiences, including the NDEs. Emotions are just a form of input. They're neither right nor wrong. What we do with the emotion, that's a different story. But emotions themselves are just input. It's just information, just like what you see or what you hear, what you taste. It's just an input. So,
I love that.
Oh, thank you. But it makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the book that I dreamed, that I finally completed the first one, not the first of the trilogy, but the first 100,000 words. And then I decided I've never published. They're not going to publish a 350,000 word book. And then, of course, today, brick and mortar and publishers have been somewhat supplanted by folks like Amazon and self-publishing and all that. But anyway, I finished the first, which is, if you look at story arcs, there's the intro to the normal world, the call to whatever the adventure is, the denying the call, having to do the call anyway, even though you don't want to. This is archetypical stuff. And then there's that first challenge. So I don't know of any movies that have, I'm sure there's some, but I haven't seen any, so I can't use recent movies as an example. But the movies that people still love to watch have that archetypical structure, typically have the arc, because it talks to us through archetypes. So I use archetypes to talk to, structure of the book is through archetypes. And that first book is about 100,000 words, and it's the first third of the protagonist's story. Now, again, it's a trilogy, so I expect all three of them I'll do in thirds. So there'll be 3 books for each storyline in the trilogy. And they take place in Atlantis. And I use the legend of Atlantis. I did a lot of geology studies and learned about the ice age, although it was an ice event. It wasn't a full ice age, the one that ended about 12,000 years ago. And used a lot of research to decide what the environment. I even looked up what animals were alive then, so it would be as close to the environment. Now, from a spiritual perspective, this story is about 50,000 years compressed into one person's lifetime. So it's really just highlights of things, not, and it's channeled information. Because I'm creative, I'm not sure I would have thought this up. So the purpose of it being in Atlantis is because it's a lot, and fiction, it's a lot easier for us to see things when we're not directly connected. The primary purpose, well, there's several. One is to help people awaken to their own personal history. Now, whether that's past lives or parallel lives, because we don't know how that works either. And if you think about it with the science, there is no time. So if there's no, this is my thinking, if there's no time, how can there be past lives? Or maybe there is time and it folds on itself. That's a theory also. Quantum physics, the research in the last 20, 30 years shows that atoms can be in two different places at the same time, but in different times. Like history, I don't totally understand it because I'm not a physicist. But the bottom line is they still communicate. So distance doesn't matter, date doesn't matter, they can still communicate. Which, if we become more compassionate and accepting of each other as a world, maybe they'll figure out how to impact things differently. I don't know. It's like it's a lot of fodder for thinking. But, go ahead. The entire series, and it's right now it's going to be around 16 books, 9 that take place in Atlantis, and the remainder 6 or 7 will be in present day. So literally what I wrote was Alithea, like I said, Alithea, Running from Fear, book 1 of the, quote, Atlantis Revisited, the Beginning of the End of Time series. But it's hard to find. Because I haven't, a lot of this, I mean, I'm going to be 68. Even though I know and I'm not afraid of computers or anything like that, I literally learned programming when I was 16 on ticker tape, punch tape that you had to feed through a machine, and then it was cards, and then it was this. Very different, because they hadn't learned how to stabilize the chip in those days so that they didn't burn out. So obviously they did that because we got laptops now. And I'm still trying to, it's like this stuff changes every week. I'm still trying to figure out how to take the picture that I made for the front cover, and I made one for the back cover too, but they're two different files, how to take those two pictures and make a book cover with a spine so that they can print it out as a paperback. So I haven't had the time as part of it. I'm sure it's not hugely complicated, but I did try it for a while, and it would let me put one picture on but not the other. So it'll take some time, I think, before it's out on paperback. But I'll probably...
But whenever...
The only way to find it is to go to Amazon, Kindle, ebooks, and then search under ebooks. PantherIlluminations.com. So BLUEPANTHERILluminations.com. Panther is, I am also a shamanic practitioner. I have a full Mesa carrier. Eventually I'll create a workshop to teach universal shamanism. The shamanism is, when it comes to healing, is just love. But the rituals, you pick the rituals that work for the people you're working with. So if they're into Reiki, I'm also a Reiki master. If they're into Reiki, I use Reiki. If they're into Native American, I'll use Native American shamanism. But again, just for emotional and mental healing, not so much physical, because I don't want to go there. I think it's kind of against the law here. But, and I put it under the coaching. So if you go to my website, there's all kinds of things. But eventually, I'm hoping, because I have 3 membership areas, I'm hoping to get back into writing every weekend, and I'll be publishing those chapters on the website until it's complete again, and then I can publish the next book. So that's another way to see what's going on. Also, as I mentioned earlier when we were just talking, my next writing project is actually a memoir in 5 parts. So I'll be publishing that eventually on Amazon, but as I'm writing each part, that'll be published on the website so people can read it if they're curious. So like the first part will be about the NDEs, but with a little more detail than what is possible in this. And the SDE, the shared death experience. And then the second one, because people are curious, all my angel experiences. I've had my life saved several times. Then all those dreams that gave me information. And then what happens when you have guides directing you and you don't want to do it and they make you do it anyway. So you understand that one. It's like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Like, okay, fine, whatever. I find that I'm a storyteller by nature. I'm a caregiver. That's who I am, obviously, when you know my life. But I've also had a significant number of traumas. Ones that I would, not just health traumas, but abuse, molestation, bullying. I didn't even know it was bullying at the time because it wasn't a catchword growing up. And stuff like that. So I grew and learned a lot because, like we were talking earlier, we grow and learn if we choose to. You have to make the choice. But we grow and learn from the tough times, not the easy times.
I'm so glad that you finally found the time to be able to really put this into writing, because I'm sure that so many people will be helped by it. And as a call out to everybody listening, please do check out Sara's book. Please check out her website and just stay up to date there with the new projects that she has going on, because she's quite busy.